Hello everyone. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's jump in. I used to work for a cleaning company that sent me all over town. Offices, banks, schools, places that were quiet when everyone else was asleep. But the strangest job I ever had was at this restaurant that doubled as a church. It sounds weird, I know, but it really was both. The upstairs was a small chapel that hosted services on Sundays, and downstairs was a restaurant that opened during the week. The whole property sat right next to an old graveyard, one of those big ones with crumbling stones, uneven ground, and iron gates that squeak no matter how much oil you use. The funny thing is, I only lived about 5 minutes from that graveyard, so it didn't really feel strange to me at first. It was just another job. I started cleaning there around 4 in the morning, and usually finished by 7. The restaurant didn't open until later, and the first employees didn't show up until 9, so I was always completely alone when I worked. For the first few months, I didn't mind it at all. The building was old, sure, but it was quiet, peaceful even. I listened to the hum of the refrigerators, the faint ticking of a wall clock, and the distant cawing of crows that gathered in the graveyard trees at dawn. It was a slow, steady kind of silence that let you focus. Every morning I followed the same routine. I'd start in the dining area, wiping down the tables and mopping the floors. Then I'd move to the kitchen, scrubbing the counters, cleaning the fryers, restocking supplies. I'd finish by going downstairs to the storage room to put away the mops, buckets, and rags. The stairs creaked under my weight every single time, but I got used to it. I even liked it in a way. The basement had a weird smell, part cleaning chemicals, part damp wood, but I didn't think much of it. That all changed one morning in early August. It was already hot outside even before sunrise, the kind of sticky heat that makes your clothes cling to your skin. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen and was taking my supplies downstairs like I always did. The stairway light was dim, and the air felt heavier than usual, like the kind of stillness before a storm. I reached the bottom of the stairs, and all of a sudden this wave of fear hit me so hard, it nearly made me drop everything I was holding. It didn't feel like normal nerves or like I'd just scared myself. It was instant and total. Like my whole body was screaming at me to leave. My chest tightened, my skin prickled, and I swear every instinct I had was telling me that I wasn't supposed to be down there. It felt like something in the air itself was warning me. I stood there for a long time, just frozen with my cleaning bucket in my hands, staring into that dim basement. Nothing moved. There wasn't a sound, not even the usual humming from the fridge upstairs. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just the heat, that maybe my blood sugar was low or something. But no matter what I told myself, that feeling wouldn't leave. My eyes kept darting toward the far wall where the old shelves were lined with cleaning products and boxes of napkins. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop staring into that corner. I forced myself to finish. Every second down there felt like walking on thin ice. My hands were shaking as I put the supplies away, and by the time I went back upstairs, I was so close to crying I could barely think straight. I remember wiping my face with my sleeve and trying to calm down, but the air upstairs didn't feel any better. I worked fast that morning, trying to keep my mind busy, but that feeling of danger just wouldn't leave. When I finally walked out and locked the door behind me, it felt like I had been underwater and finally came up for air. After that, I couldn't work there without feeling uneasy. At first, it was small things. A sudden shiver while mopping. A sense that I was being watched when I passed the hallway that led down to the basement. I'd try to shake it off, tell myself it was all in my head, but it kept happening. Then one morning, while I was cleaning the front doors, the automatic doors by the kitchen suddenly slid open on their own. They were motion activated, but I was the only person in the building and I hadn't walked near them. I just stood there, staring at them as they opened, stayed open for a few seconds and then shut again. That became a regular thing. The doors would open randomly at times when I was on the other side of the building. Sometimes they'd do it once, sometimes they'd open and close several times in a row. I started checking the sensors, thinking maybe there was a spider web or a piece of dust setting them off. But there was nothing. Clean as a whistle. Then the stereo in the kitchen started turning on by itself. It was this old black stereo they used during the day to play quiet background music while customers ate. I'd be wiping down tables and suddenly, from the kitchen, I'd hear a few seconds of static or a bit of a song, then silence. Sometimes it would play for a full minute, sometimes just a second, but it always happened when I was far from it. I started unplugging it every time I worked, but even that didn't always help. It would click on, light up, then flicker back off. That was when I started seeing it. It wasn't clear, like something you could describe or recognize. But there were moments when I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, something dark and tall that moved just out of sight. I'd turn and there'd be nothing. Once, while I was mopping the main hallway that led to the bathrooms, I saw what looked like a person's shadow move across the far wall. It was quick, like someone had walked in front of a light that wasn't even there. I remember standing there gripping the mop so tight my hands hurt just listening. There wasn't a single sound, not even the hum of the cooler that was usually running. Every time something happened, that same cold fear from the basement would come rushing back. I'd feel it in my stomach, like I was about to throw up, and all I could think about was getting out of that place. But I needed the job. Rent wasn't going to pay itself, and I told myself that maybe it was electrical issues or the building settling. Anything to explain it away. Still, the fear got worse. Some mornings I'd park my car in front of the restaurant, and before I even stepped out, I'd feel that dread crawling up my back. I'd sit there for a few minutes staring at the front doors, trying to convince myself to go in. I'd start thinking about that graveyard behind it, the rows of old stones, the uneven ground, and the way fog liked to hang low over it in the mornings. I'd think about how quiet that whole stretch of road was, how no one would hear you if you screamed. It didn't help that the streetlights there flickered constantly, and sometimes the one right above the parking lot would die altogether, leaving the building in darkness. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I started looking for other jobs, anything that didn't involve being alone in that building. After a few weeks, I finally landed one, and I've never been so relieved in my life. When my supervisor told me I'd have to train my replacement for one day before leaving, I almost said no. But I needed a good reference, so I agreed. That last day was awful. I tried to act normal while showing the new guy around, where the supplies were, what order to clean things in, how to reset the alarms. He seemed relaxed, even joked about how creepy the graveyard looked through the windows, but I couldn't even laugh. The whole time I felt that same heavy air pressing on me, that same warning. I remember walking down into the basement one last time to show him where the mops were kept, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing near the far wall again, half hidden behind a shelf. But when I blinked, it was gone. I didn't say a word. I finished showing him everything, wished him luck, and got out of there as fast as I could. I remember the exact feeling when the door closed behind me and I stepped outside. The sunlight, the noise of cars passing in the distance, the way the air felt lighter. I knew right then that I'd never set foot in that place again, and I haven't. I still drive past it sometimes on my way to work or running errands. The restaurant's still there, same name on the sign, same graveyard beside it. Every now and then, I'll see the lights flicker on early in the morning when no one should be there. I don't know if it's just the motion sensors again or something else. And honestly, I don't care to find out. I just keep driving. Whatever it was that made me feel that kind of fear, it didn't feel like a story or a haunting. It felt like a warning. Something real. Something in that building that wanted me gone. And I listened. I've never been the kind of person who believes in strange things. I like to think everything has a reason behind it. something that makes sense if you look close enough. But sometimes things happen that don't fit neatly into logic. And no matter how many times I go over it in my head, I can't explain it in any way that feels satisfying. It started when I was in high school, around my junior year. Back then, my days all blurred together. I'd wake up, catch the bus, drift through classes, and just wait for the final bell. The hallways were always full of noise, people shouting, locker doors slamming, sneakers squeaking against the floor. That background chaos was normal. But in my dreams, those same halls looked completely different. Empty, hollow, almost echoing with the silence that doesn't belong in a place made for hundreds of people. One night I had this dream. I was walking through those halls alone. Everything looked normal. The beige walls, the faded green lockers, the long strips of fluorescent lights humming faintly above me. My footsteps were soft, like I was afraid of being heard, even though there was no one else around. It was one of those dreams where you know exactly where you are, but you don't know why. Up ahead of me, there was a woman. She was maybe 30 or 40 feet away, walking in the same direction. I couldn't see her face, just her back. She wore a dark skirt and a pale blouse, something that reminded me more of a teacher than a student. I didn't recognize her, and that struck me as strange, because I knew everyone in that building, at least by sight. Then she stopped. She didn't turn around, just froze like she'd forgotten what she was doing. I slowed my pace too, not sure if I should keep walking. Then out of nowhere she bent backward at the waist. It wasn't natural. It was slow, deliberate, and she went back far enough that her face was upside down, staring straight at me. Her hair fell forward and her mouth hung slightly open, like she was about to say something but couldn't. I couldn't move. Then she straightened up again, turned a corner and was gone. That's all I remember before waking up. I didn't feel scared exactly, just unsettled. It was one of those dreams that sticks to you even after you've had breakfast and started your day. It felt so specific and strange that I couldn't get it out of my head. Over the next couple of days, life just went on. School was the same, friends the same boring routines. I forgot about the dream after a while. Then a few days later, during third period, the office called my name over the intercom. The secretary said they needed me to pick something up. It wasn't unusual. Sometimes my mom would drop something off for me if I'd left it at home. A notebook, a form, whatever. I got up, grabbed my hall pass, and started down the hallway. The school felt weirdly quiet that morning. Most of the classes were in session, so the halls were empty, except for the faint sounds of muffled voices behind closed doors. My shoes squeaked on the linoleum. I remember how the air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and pencil shavings, the kind of mix that only schools have. When I turned the corner near the trophy case, I saw someone ahead of me, a woman. She was wearing a long skirt and a white blouse. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was a staff member, a teacher I hadn't had before. She was carrying a large cardboard box in front of her, stacked high enough that she could barely see over it. I slowed down, not wanting to startle her. Then it happened. The box started to tilt. She lost her grip slightly, and to steady it, she bent backward. Not just leaning a little, but really bending, the same way the woman in my dream had. Her back arched, her arms adjusted under the weight, and her head tilted just enough that for a second her face was nearly upside down, eyes flicking up toward me without meaning to. It hit me instantly. I stopped walking. My chest felt tight. It was the exact same movement, the same posture, the same angle, everything. It only lasted a second before she caught the box and straightened back up. She didn't even notice me standing there. She just turned into one of the side offices and disappeared. But I stayed frozen in the hall for a good minute, staring at the spot where she'd been, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I knew I'd seen. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything. My thoughts kept circling back to that dream. The details lined up too perfectly. The same hallway, the same kind of silence, the same woman bending in that strange, impossible way. It wasn't like a vague déjà vu. It was exact, like I'd watched a recording days before it happened. That wasn't the first time I'd had something like that happen, but it was the clearest. There'd been smaller things before, little dreams that played out later. Walking into a classroom and seeing someone drop their binder at the exact moment I'd dreamt it. Hearing a sentence I knew I'd already heard before. I always brushed it off as coincidence because what else could it be? But this one was too detailed, too specific. I didn't tell anyone about it. It sounded stupid even in my head. Nobody wants to hear someone say they saw something in a dream and then watched it happen later. People roll their eyes or tell you you're imagining things, and maybe that's what it was. But I know what I saw. I can still picture every inch of that hallway. The way the light flickered faintly above the lockers. The dull scuff marks on the floor, the echo of my footsteps. For days after, I found myself replaying that dream in my head, trying to remember if there was anything else in it that I'd missed, something that might tell me why I saw it. But there wasn't. It was just that, a quiet hallway, a woman, a strange motion, and nothing more. Eventually, life went back to normal. I graduated, moved on, and the memory faded into that category of strange little stories you only think about when someone brings up dreams or coincidences. But sometimes, especially when I'm walking alone in a long, empty corridor, like in hospitals, offices, or even parking garages late at night, I get that same strange feeling again. The feeling that I've already seen this exact place before, that something is just a few seconds away from lining up perfectly with a memory I can't control. I never had a dream that clear again, not one that played out so precisely. A few small things, sure. Seeing faces I didn't know until later, hearing words that came back to me, but nothing that exact. Still, that one moment stuck with me because of how real it was. It wasn't mystical or dramatic. It didn't change my life or reveal some big truth. It was just something that happened. Quiet, ordinary, impossible. The older I got, the more I realized how strange it really was. I tried reasoning it out, telling myself maybe I'd seen that woman before. Subconsciously stored the image somewhere in my mind. Maybe I'd just imagined the connection after the fact, twisting my memory to fit the coincidence. That's what I tell myself when I need to sleep at night. But the truth is, I can still see her in my mind exactly as she was. Her back arched, her face turned toward me upside down. That blank look like she didn't even know I was there. And every time I think about it, I remember how real it felt. The hum of the lights, the smell of the air, the echo of my steps. And I wonder if somewhere out there, another dream is waiting, already written, just biding its time until I walk into it again. I grew up in a small, quiet town where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least thought they did. The houses were close enough that you could hear when someone's dog barked or when their back door slammed shut. There was one house on our street, though, that everyone whispered about. It sat right across from ours, old and square-looking, with chipped white paint and an overgrown hedge that was always full of spiders. People said strange things happened in there. Some claimed they'd seen lights flickering at odd hours. Others said they'd heard voices coming from inside when the place was empty. Every few years, a new family moved in, but they never stayed long. My parents said it was just an old house that creaked and settled, and that people liked to make up stories. Still, even as a kid, I never liked walking past it after dark. In 2001, a new family bought it. They had 2 kids around my age, a boy named Mark and a girl named Claire. Finally, it felt like the rumors might fade away because they were normal, friendly people. Their parents worked in town. They had a golden retriever named Milo, and they even invited neighbors over for a barbecue when they first moved in. Me and the other kids on the street were thrilled to have new friends. We'd play tag, ride bikes, build tree forts, and in the summer we'd sleep over at each other's houses. After a while, we even started sleeping over at Claire and Mark's place, though not everyone liked staying there. The first few times we stayed, it was fun. Their house smelled like old wood and cinnamon because their mom baked all the time. The floors creaked in almost every room, but that was normal for an older house. At night, though, weird things started happening. Blankets would get pulled off while we were half asleep. Doors that were open would slam shut suddenly. Sometimes we'd hear knocking on the windows, even when we were on the second floor. Toys would go missing, then show up in strange spots like on the kitchen counter or in the bathroom sink. We used to think it was one of the older kids messing with us, trying to freak us out, because the town was small and pranks were a normal thing. Nobody wanted to admit they were scared, but I could tell we all were. One afternoon, something happened that stuck with me. We were in their kitchen, just me and Claire. Her brother was outside somewhere with the dog. On the counter was a big glass bowl full of apples. We were standing by the sink talking about school when the bowl just moved. Not like it rolled off or got nudged. It slid fast across the counter, dropped, and shattered on the floor. Every apple rolled in different directions. We both froze. There wasn't anyone else in the room, and the window was closed. No wind, nothing. I remember the sound of the glass breaking echoing so loud it felt wrong, like it didn't fit in the moment. We both just stood there staring at the mess. When her mom came in and saw it, she asked what happened, and Claire said she dropped it. I didn't say anything. I didn't even know what to say. After that, the weird things didn't stop, but I tried not to think about it. Sometimes when I was over there, I'd feel this strange heaviness in certain rooms, especially her bedroom. It wasn't scary exactly, but uncomfortable, like the air was thicker. You'd feel watched. I didn't mention it to anyone because it sounded stupid, but I know I wasn't the only one who noticed. Even their dog avoided that part of the house most of the time. Months went by, and I still went over there a lot. We'd hang out after school or on weekends, usually outside in the yard or in the living room. One day during summer, I decided to go over around noon. It was hot out, bright and still, and everyone in our small neighborhood had their windows open. I didn't bother knocking because that's how things were back then. Nobody locked their doors during the day. If the door wasn't locked, you just walked in and called out. I did that all the time. That day, I walked straight through their front door and shouted Claire's name. No answer. The house was quiet. Not normal quiet, but that heavy silence you get when there's absolutely no movement. No sound from outside, no creaks, nothing. I figured they might be in the backyard, so I went down the hallway toward her room. Her door had this big rectangular glass panel in it, kind of frosted but still clear enough to see inside. I looked in and the room was empty. I could see her bed, the little desk by the window, even her open closet door. Everything looked normal, sunlight coming through the curtains. I was about to turn and go toward the back door when, for some reason, I grabbed the handle. I don't even know why, maybe just instinct. The handle wouldn't move. It wasn't locked, I could tell. When a door's locked, the handle still turns loosely but doesn't open. This one didn't move at all. It was like someone on the other side was holding it in place. I tried again, harder, and it still wouldn't budge. My first thought was that Claire was playing around, trying to scare me. I leaned close to the glass and looked again. The room was completely empty. The air inside didn't move, the curtains didn't shift, but I swear I could feel something pressing against the handle from the other side, firm and steady, like a hand refusing to let me in. Then I heard it, sound so low it didn't even seem like a voice at first. More like air vibrating through the wood. It said no. Not loud, not shouted, but deep, almost like it came from the floor itself. I froze. Every muscle in my body went stiff. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I wanted to run, but my legs didn't respond. My brain kept telling me to move, but all I could do was stare at that door, at the handle I still had my hand on. I remember the cold sweat running down my back, the sound of my own breathing too loud in my ears. When I finally managed to let go, I started backing up slowly toward the front door. I didn't want to turn my back on it. The air felt wrong, like the pressure in the whole house had changed. The hallway seemed darker than before, even though the sun was still bright outside. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob to leave, and that's when I heard it again, the faint metal creak of the door handle from her room turning. I looked and saw it move on its own, slow and steady. Then the door itself began to open just a few inches. Enough that I could see the edge of the frame shift, but not enough to see inside. That was it for me. I bolted. I don't remember unlocking the front door or closing it behind me. I just remember the sound of my shoes slapping against the driveway and the sunlight hitting my face. I ran straight home, slammed my own door shut, and sat on the kitchen floor trying to catch my breath. My mom asked why I looked pale, but I didn't tell her what happened. I couldn't even think of words that made sense. I didn't go back there alone for a long time after that. Eventually, I did go again, but only with friends, never by myself. The family still lived there for another year or two, and then they sold the place and moved out without much explanation. Another family bought it, then another, same as before. It's still standing today, though it looks even older now, like the paint's never been touched since I was a kid. Every time I drive past, I feel that same uneasy weight in my chest, like something in there remembers me. Looking back, I can't explain what happened. Maybe there was some logical reason for it. Maybe the door was jammed, maybe I imagined the sound. Maybe it was just one of those moments where your mind twists things when you're nervous. But I know what I felt. That pressure on the handle, that sound that didn't come from any person, and that heavy stillness that filled the whole house before the door moved. I've told myself 100 times that it was nothing, that it had to be something explainable. Still, even now, whenever I see glass doors or hear a low sound in an empty room, that memory comes back, clear as day. I never believed in the ghost stories people told about that house. I still don't. But I know one thing. There was something in there that day, something that didn't want me to open that door. And whatever it was, it felt real enough that I never, not once in my life, tried to find out what was on the other side. The house I grew up in was old and narrow, 2 families stacked like wooden boxes. We lived on the top floor. The basement took up the whole footprint of the house. It was half storage, half laundry room, but mostly it felt like a place that belonged to shadows. You had to walk down a steep, creaky staircase into a blank wall of dark. The only light hung dead center in the room, a bare bulb on a long pull string. To reach it, you had to cross a wide floor of pitch black and trust that your feet would find the concrete, and not something sharp or wet. I never trusted it. I never went down there without something in my hands. The basement smelled like cold concrete, damp cardboard, and old clothes that had lost the battle with mildew. Shelves leaned under years of boxes and paint cans. The washing machine had a ring of rust at the bottom of its drum. There was a single utility sink with stained porcelain, and a faucet that dripped slowly when it felt like it. The ceiling was low, and the pipes made odd, slow noises that sounded like a building breathing. Sometimes the pipes clanked and my heart would jump because the sound traveled across the dark like a footstep. My parents were practical people. My mother left me a note on the kitchen table the day she had to run out. Move the clothes from the washer to the dryer. It was not an exciting chore, but at 10 years old I took it seriously because the house ran on small, everyday rules. I grabbed the only thing that felt like protection in a house full of ordinary tools. A plastic wiffle ball bat, bright yellow with a handle worn smooth where my hand fit it. It was not much, but it had weight, and for that moment it felt enough. I remember the light in the hallway seemed different that afternoon. It went from pale and safe to thin and far away, as if the house itself had closed one of its eyes. The staircase groaned under my steps. My hand slid along the banister and caught on the chipped paint. It left a smear of skin oil I could see in the dim. At the bottom of the stairs, the doorway opened into nothing. For a second I stood there, bat in both hands, listening to the washing machine. The pull string hung like a tongue from the belly of the room. I had imagined what would be in that dark since I was a toddler. I had pictures in my head of monsters crouched behind boxes, of shapes that watched and waited. I had practiced swinging the bat in the doorway like a knight. The fear was an old friend. I reached out and grabbed the string. My fingers were numb. The string was cool and rough. The bulb snapped alive with a weak yellow light. It did not flood the room the way I had hoped. Instead, it made islands. A pool around the washer, a smaller circle around the dryer, a long shadow that reached from the shelf stacks like a finger. In the nearest pool of light, a man stood less than 10 feet away from me. He was not a monster. He was a man, breathing too fast, shoulders hunched. He looked like someone who had been on the run for a while. His clothes were dirty and torn at the knees. His hair was matted. There was a kind of wildness in the tilt of his head, but it was not theatrical. It was the raw kind that comes from exhaustion and cold and hunger. His chest rose and fell with hard pulls of air. The smell of him hit me first. A sharp, oily smell of sweat and someone who had slept outdoors. And under that, the sour scent of fear. I froze. The bat began to slide in my hands. My wrist shook from the sudden swing in adrenaline. My mind emptied into a single hot focus, not to move, not to make a sound. My mouth was dry. The man's eyes darted, searching for a door, a window, anything. There was a small metal door that led directly outside, the basement's back exit, and he was standing between me and it. I did not know what he wanted. I did not know if he knew I was a child. I did not know if there were others. I could hear the washing machine thump on its spin cycle, a slow, unimpressed sound in the middle of the scene. The man took a step backward toward the darker part of the room. His breath came out in quick white puffs that hung in the air under the bulb. In those seconds, the basement felt thin as paper. I expected movement, sudden and horrible, like the end of a chase in a movie. Instead, the man shifted his weight and turned toward the outside door. From somewhere behind me, from a place higher and within the house, a gun made a dry, workmanlike sound as it was readied. It was not a yell or pleading. It was a mechanical click, sharp in the simple echo of the room. The man stopped. He glanced toward where the sound had come from. A small animal tilt, and then he moved away. He did not hesitate long. He walked toward the door with quick, low steps, opened it, and vanished into the yard. Afterward, the things that mattered in a clear, practical way happened fast. My father had been in the kitchen by the window. Earlier, he had seen men running across backyards. Police nearby with voices I could not quite place from inside the house. He had watched one of the men leap over the fence into our yard and try the basement door. He had seen for a few seconds the door handle move like a mouse. He had seen the dark and then, for a flash of time, light. He had gone for a gun because he did not have time to sort out what else to do. He had come down the back steps and stood with the gun held steady until the man left. Later I learned the police had chased 3 people that evening, who had been running from a different place, not ours. One of the suspects had slipped through yards and tried basement doors. That was the practical end of it. The police found 2 and not the 3rd that night. And the one who had checked our door was never the one they cuffed in that particular moment. After the man left, my father came downstairs. He did not speak. He took the bat out of my hands like a parent taking a child's toy and put it on the dryer. He made me sit on the step and he looked at my face the way he did when a scab needed to be cleaned. His hands were steady and warm. He checked the lock on the back door and then he walked around the basement, feeling along the shelves, checking the windows, making sure no one else was hiding behind boxes. I remember the echo of his shoes on the concrete, the methodical way he moved his flashlight into corners. He left warmth in the parts of the room he passed through, like he was burning small safe places into the dark. The police came later. They took statements and wrote down names and addresses. A neighbor came over and looked at the backyard, his breath fogging. They put up temporary caution tape across the gate to our yard and left a card for my parents. The television news the next day had reporters who talked about a pursuit, and the camera showed blur and police lights and a stretch of neighborhood I recognized from the bus route. Adults spoke in low voices in the kitchen and used big words like home invasion and suspect and warrant. I listened and collected the facts like marbles, but the important things were the small details. How my father had moved without shouting, how the bulb above the basement had hummed when the man stood beneath it, how the smell of his coat stayed in my nose for a long time. The house changed after that. My mother insisted on a new deadbolt for the basement door, and my father installed a motion light outside that made the backyard snap into harsh day whenever something crossed it. They moved the washing machine around so the door did not open directly onto the steps. They put a bolt on the inside of the basement door too. The shelves were reorganized. Old boxes were tossed in the first round of clearing out. My parents talked in hushed tones about locks and insurance and the police report, but they kept their voices low around me because they did not want my small world to become a nest of alarms. Practical adjustments were their way of answering the fear. For a long while, I could only go into the basement when someone went with me. Even then, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else, and the bat felt foreign in my hands. I would stand in the doorway and count the steps in my head before moving. I learned to flip a light on with my elbow and leave it on while I pushed a laundry basket across the floor. I washed clothes with the light blazing like a protective sun. If I had to go alone, I told myself to take off my shoes and walk slowly so I would be quieter, which made no sense. But it felt like it helped. At night, I dreamed of the man's face, not in a flash but as a smudge, like memory on a window that would not wipe away. Over the years, the sharpness of the memory softened, but the basement never lost its bite. When I moved out of that house, it was with a careful hand on the doorknob. I could think with cool logic about locks and alarms and statistics. I could write down what happened without the hot burn of panic. Yet sometimes in my own apartment, when the building settled and an old pipe clanged, I would feel something crawl along my skin, and I would remember standing under that single bulb and the man stepping back and the click that had split the room. Fear, I learned, is like a photograph. You can develop it and frame it and hang it on the wall. You can look at it and explain the edges, but it still carries weight. The end of the story was not a single big thing. There was no movie-style showdown or neat resolution. There were follow-up calls from the police months later. A neighbor who said he had seen someone fitting the description a few streets over, and a court date that I never had to sit through. The practical changes my parents made stayed in place and worked. The locks held. The motion light kept the yard bright. The washing machine never left a load sitting long enough to cause trouble. Those were real useful outcomes. The fear they could not fix stayed with me in quieter ways. Years later, I returned to the house for a brief visit. The neighborhood looked older but familiar. The same back gate creaked, and I could still find the place where the basement door locked. I stood on the back steps and felt the weight of the air there, the way it seemed just a little thicker, as if the space had kept something of that night locked into its beams. I did not go down. I touched the cold metal of the railing and thought about the boy who had stood under the bulb, clutching a plastic bat, waiting for a monster that turned out to be a frightened man. Thought about my father and how he had moved without drama, how he had protected what he could protect. I do not go into basements the way other people do. I avoid their dark centers, the places where a single pull string controls the world. When I have to, I turn on every light, set the dryer running so it makes noise like company, and leave the door open so there is somewhere to run. I keep a flashlight in my shoe closet because it is the first place my hand goes when something knocks. I learned to make my surroundings visible and to prepare small defenses. And I learned that sometimes the best thing is not to be brave in the dramatic, cinematic way, but to be steady and practical until the danger passes. The memory of that night is sharp enough to teach me still. It taught me caution, yes, but also how quickly ordinary life can bend, and how ordinary people can move into that bend and make it less harmful. The locks my parents installed did their job. The neighbor who later fixed a loose fence did his job. The police answered what they could. None of those things erased the fear, but they turned it into something I could live with. I kept my bat for a while after that, not because it had power, but because I liked the feel of holding something that meant I might act if I had to. Eventually, I donated it. I kept the lesson instead, that safety is made from small, steady measures, and from people who do what needs doing when something goes wrong. I still think about the basement sometimes. The image of that man under the bulb is not a horror story in my head anymore. It is a clear, terrible slice of a night when my childhood stopped being wholly simple. The ending I have is not dramatic. It is practical and stubborn. The house stood. My family locked the doors. I grew up knowing how to check the yard before I went outside, how to keep my hands free for a key, how to make a plan when fear shows up. It is not a tidy closure, but it is enough. It is the sort of ending that keeps you moving forward, one careful, deliberate step at a time. It happened a few years back, when I stayed over at my uncle's place for a weekend. He lived on the outskirts of town, in one of those ranch-style houses that sat on a few acres of dry land, the kind of place that looked peaceful in the day but got strangely quiet at night. He and his wife didn't have kids, so there was always an extra room open when I visited. That time he told me I could stay in the guest room by the garage, which was more like a small studio connected to the side of the house. It had its own door that opened to the driveway, and a small window facing the yard. We planned to go fishing early the next morning, so I went to bed a little after midnight. I remember the sound of the garage door rattling faintly when the wind picked up outside. The room smelled faintly of oil and old wood, probably from being so close to the garage. It wasn't uncomfortable, just that kind of smell that lingers around places where tools and gasoline cans have sat for years. The bed was a twin, with one of those creaky metal frames that made a sound every time I shifted. I left my fishing clothes folded neatly on the chair next to the door, my phone plugged in on the nightstand. The only light came from a small lamp with a weak yellow bulb, which I turned off before lying down. Outside, I could still see the faint glow from the motion light above the garage door, leaking through the blinds. I must have fallen asleep sometime after 1 in the morning. When I woke up, it was still pitch dark. I didn't know what time it was, but the kind of quiet that filled the room felt like the hours before dawn, when even the crickets stopped for a while. I was lying on my side, facing the window, and I remember thinking how cold the air felt against my face. There was no noise except for my own breathing. Then I noticed a shape. At first, it didn't register. My eyes were still adjusting, and the dim light from the window barely outlined anything. But as I blinked a few times, I saw it more clearly. A silhouette of someone standing against the far wall, just inside the room. A man, tall and slightly hunched, like he was leaning on the wall with one shoulder. He wasn't moving, just standing there facing me. For a second, I froze. My first thought was that it was my uncle. Maybe he'd come in to wake me up for fishing. It made sense. It was still dark, and he probably didn't want to turn the light on and startle me. So I sat up a little and said something like, "Yeah, I'm getting up. Let's go." My voice came out groggy, half asleep. He didn't say anything back, still thinking nothing of it. I got up, brushed past where he was standing, and walked toward the wall to flip the light switch. I remember feeling this strange mix of tiredness and annoyance, like I was too sleepy to care why he wasn't talking. I turned the light on and blinked against the sudden brightness. You see, room was empty, no one was there. The only space where I had just seen someone standing was clear, the wall, bare except for an old framed picture and a fishing rod. Leaning in the corner, I stood there for a second, confused, then checked the door. It was closed. I even glanced under the bed like an idiot. Nothing. The air felt heavier now, like it does when your heart starts pounding and you can hear your pulse in your ears. I told myself I must have been dreaming. Maybe I'd half woken up and imagined it. That made sense. I turned the light back off, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. My eyes wouldn't stop darting around the room, waiting to see that shape again. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, sunlight came through the blinds, cutting lines across the wall. My uncle knocked on the door, cheerful, asking if I was ready. I got up, got dressed, and went fishing like nothing happened. I didn't even mention what I saw. It seemed too weird, and I didn't want him thinking I'd been seeing things or losing it. After that weekend, I didn't think about it much. The image of that dark shape standing there faded into the background of my mind, like a half-remembered dream. Life got busy, and months went by before I visited again. One evening, I was over at my uncle's house for dinner. It was late summer, warm and still outside. The kind of evening where the smell of barbecue clings to your clothes. We were all sitting in the dining room, me, my uncle, and my aunt. She was clearing dishes when she said casually, "I really need to take Uncle Benny's ashes up to the mountain this weekend. He's been here for a while now." I didn't think anything of it at first. I just asked, "Who's Uncle Benny?" She looked at me like it was obvious. "My uncle. He passed a few months ago. His ashes are in the garage on that shelf by the workbench." It hit me a second later. The garage. The same one connected to the room where I'd stayed. The same wall where I'd seen that silhouette standing months ago. I didn't say anything right away. I just kind of nodded, but I felt this strange chill crawl up my back. I tried to act normal through dinner, but my mind kept replaying that night over and over again. The shape I saw hadn't been hazy or dreamlike. It had been clear, like a real person standing there. The way the figure leaned against the wall, how still it was, the quiet in the air. Later, when I walked out to my car, I passed the garage. The door was half open, light spilling out onto the driveway. I glanced inside. On one of the shelves above a stack of paint cans and old fishing gear was a small metal urn, plain and gray. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a coffee can, but seeing it made something tighten in my chest. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that what I saw that night wasn't just a dream. Maybe my brain had picked up something I didn't understand at the time. Maybe it was the way light from the garage leaked through the door, casting a shadow that just happened to look human. Or maybe somehow, I woke up at the exact moment my half-asleep mind tried to make sense of a shape that wasn't really there. But there's something about that room I still remember vividly. The way it felt when I woke up. The heaviness of the air. How it seemed like I wasn't alone even though I was. The kind of feeling that doesn't fade with time. Just hides in the corners of your memory until something brings it back. After that night, I never stayed in that room again. When I visited, I'd crash on the couch or one of the recliners in the living room. My uncle probably thought I just preferred it that way. I never told him about what I saw, and I never asked my aunt when exactly her uncle had died. But sometimes I think about that moment, walking past what I thought was my uncle, close enough to feel like someone was really standing there. I can still remember how natural it felt, how certain I was that a real person was in that room, the nothing. And every now and then when I'm half awake in some dark room, I catch myself staring into the shadows, waiting to see if there's something or someone, leaning quietly against the wall, just watching. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Mark. My mom said I used to whisper to him at night when I was supposed to be asleep. She told me later that she would sometimes stand outside my door and listen to me talking, thinking maybe I was just playing or that I was lonely. I was about 5 or 6 at the time, so it didn't seem strange to her. Most kids had imaginary friends. She said I would laugh softly and tell him secrets, and sometimes she'd hear me pause like I was listening to someone answer. I don't remember much of those conversations now. Just that I used to picture him as a boy a little older than me, maybe 12 or 13, with blonde hair and a serious face. I think I stopped talking about him around the time my granddad died. I remember my mom being upset all the time then, and I didn't really understand death. I do remember sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon and telling her that Mark said it was okay being dead, just boring. She told me later that it stopped her cold, that it was the first time she really wondered if I'd overheard someone talking about death and tried to make sense of it, or if it was just one of those weird, eerie things kids say. I had apparently said that Mark stroked my hair when I was sad, or when I was trying to sleep, and that he told me he used to be alone a lot too. I didn't remember any of this growing up. Childhood memories blur together, and most of mine faded into the usual mix of playgrounds, cartoons, and summer holidays. I didn't think about Mark again until years later, when I was maybe 21. My mom dragged me to this fortune teller that people at her work kept talking about. I didn't want to go. I wasn't into that kind of thing, and I figured it was just someone fishing for reactions and charging money for guesses. The woman's house smelled like incense and dust. It was cluttered with crystals and little bowls of dried herbs. I remember feeling awkward sitting in this tiny, warm room with heavy curtains, while my mom took it seriously. The woman was actually pretty accurate about some stuff, family things that ended up happening not long after, and I could tell my mom was impressed. I was sitting there reading a book and just waiting for it to be over, when the woman looked right at me and said almost casually, "You have someone with you." I remember frowning because I thought she meant my mum. But then she said, "A boy, blonde, about 16 or 17. He's quiet, but he stays close. He's sad that you don't see him anymore." My stomach dropped a little. It was one of those moments where you feel like you've heard something before, but can't place it. My mum's head snapped up and she asked what she meant. The woman just shrugged and said it wasn't a bad thing, that the boy didn't want to hurt me. He just felt protective. That's when my mum told her about my imaginary friend, Mark. I remember feeling irritated, like this woman could have easily picked up on something from my mum's reaction. But at the same time, I couldn't shake how specific the description was. Still, I brushed it off. I said it was probably some vague thing she said to everyone, and that we shouldn't take it seriously. But that night, when I lay in bed, I thought about how sometimes when I was half asleep, I'd feel something brush against my hair. I always thought it was the wind from the open window, or maybe static from the pillow. But in that moment it came back to me, that faint, careful touch. Over the years, little things happened that made me remember that day. Once when I was about 25, I was walking home from work. It was autumn, one of those evenings where the air feels heavy before rain. A woman stopped me on the pavement. She was older, probably in her 50s, wearing a long coat and carrying grocery bags. She looked right at me like she recognized me and said quietly, "There's a blonde boy walking just behind you." I froze, but before I could say anything, she just smiled faintly, said, "He's not bad," and kept walking. She didn't ask for money or attention or anything. She just went on her way. I stood there for a long time watching her go, feeling completely unsettled. After that, I started noticing odd things. Little drafts when windows were closed. A pressure on the mattress when I was lying down, as if someone sat on the edge for a moment. Faint smell of damp grass sometimes, like the kind you get after a rainstorm. Even when everything was dry, I kept telling myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. You start seeing patterns when you look for them. A few years later, I was in a bad relationship. My ex wasn't a good person. He had a temper, and there were a lot of nights where I felt trapped more than anything. One night, he woke me up in the middle of the night, shaking me, his face pale. He said there was someone standing over him, a boy with blonde hair, and that he looked furious. My ex didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, and he looked genuinely frightened. He said the boy just stood there, glaring at him, before disappearing when he blinked. I told him it was a dream, that he was half asleep, but I could tell it shook him up. After that, his stuff started breaking. Tools, his phone, anything he used often. He'd blame me, but I knew I hadn't touched any of it. The day I finally told him to leave, he was shouting, packing his things in anger. As soon as he walked out the door, the framed photo of us on the coffee table tipped over, and the glass shattered across the floor. There wasn't any draft, no vibration from footsteps, nothing. It just fell. I remember standing there staring at it, feeling completely calm, almost relieved. It's strange. I don't really feel scared about any of it. I live alone now. I work a normal job, see friends, have a small apartment. But there are nights when I come home exhausted, and I'll lie in bed and feel it again. The light touch through my hair. Always gentle, always the same. It doesn't feel threatening. It almost feels like a reminder. I used to think maybe it was some subconscious thing, a trick of nerves or memory. Maybe I feel it because I expect to. Maybe it's just comfort my mind invented a long time ago that never really went away. But sometimes, it happens at the strangest moments. Like when I'm sick or stressed, or when something really bad happens. The night my mom had surgery, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake until morning, and the whole time that faint, steady motion of hair being brushed away from my forehead was there. It made me feel less alone. Now when I think about it, I don't know what's real or what's just memory shaping itself into something that fits. Maybe I did have an imaginary friend. Maybe I saw some older boy once and turned him into a story in my head. Or maybe my brain just kept the idea alive because it helped me cope with things I didn't understand. I've stopped trying to figure it out. All I know is that after all these years, it's still there. The faint rhythmic feeling of fingers running through my hair. The quiet reassurance that I'm not completely on my own. Whether it's some leftover reflex from childhood or something I've imagined into existence, it's part of me now. When I was a kid, I thought Mark was someone separate, a friend who looked after me. Now I think maybe he was just the part of myself that tried to keep me calm when everything felt too big. The part that stayed when people left, the part that never stopped trying to make things okay. And maybe that's all it ever was. Not a ghost, not a haunting, just a memory that learned how to take care of me in the only way it knew how. It always seemed like being the last one at the barn took forever. Everything felt heavier, quieter, too still. The others had already gone home. It was late, probably around 9. I remember the air had that damp, cold bite that comes in early spring, where it's not quite winter but not warm either. The sun had gone down an hour ago, leaving the kind of darkness that feels thicker than usual. The kind where the moon gives off just enough light to make shapes visible but not clear. I'd finished brushing down my horse, a big bay gelding who never startled at anything. He was calm, steady, the kind of horse you could throw a tarp over and he wouldn't flinch. I'd always trusted him more than I trusted the quiet around the barns at night. I was the last one there, which meant I had to shut everything down. Lights, water, doors, tack room. I always hated that part. Walking through the aisles, switching off one set of lights at a time, until the barn got darker and darker. You could hear everything. The creak of old wood, the slow clank of a horse shifting in its stall, the wind slipping through the gaps in the siding. Every noise felt louder than it should. When I turned off the last light, the barn fell into that hollow quiet that makes your heart beat louder just from being aware of it. I clipped the lead rope to my horse's halter and started walking him down the path to the smaller barn, the one farther down the hill. That one didn't have power or lights, so I had to rely on the moon. The gravel path crunched under my boots and his hooves made a dull thud against the packed ground. I could see my breath in the cold air, pale and steady, matching his. It was one of those nights where the moonlight turned everything a kind of silvery gray. The pasture fences glowed faintly, and the tops of the trees looked like shadows moving against shadows. My horse followed me quietly at first, his ears pointed forward, his head low, relaxed. I didn't even think about being alone. I'd done it plenty of times before, but about halfway down the path, something in him changed. It happened so fast I barely processed it. One second he was calm, and the next his head shot up so suddenly it yanked the lead rope tight in my hand. He froze, muscles rigid, ears locked on something ahead of us. I felt the tension run straight up the rope into my arm. I stopped walking and tried to see what he was looking at, but I couldn't hear or see anything out of place. The fields were quiet, no crickets, no wind, just dead still. Then he snorted hard, threw his head, and reared. His front hooves came off the ground, and I had to jump back to keep from being knocked down. I'd never seen him do that before, not once. The whites of his eyes flashed in the moonlight, and I could feel him trembling through the rope. It was like he was staring at something just beyond the edge of the trees, something I couldn't see. I followed his gaze, squinting into the dark. At first, it looked like just shadows. The fence line, maybe the edge of the woods. But then I saw them, two small glints of light low to the ground at first, then higher like someone had stood up. They weren't animal eyes. They were too far apart, too steady. They didn't blink right. I remember freezing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shape around them was swallowed in darkness, but the eyes caught the moonlight just enough to shine. Human eyes watching. I felt my throat tighten like I wanted to yell, but no sound came out. My horse backed up a few steps, pulling hard on the lead rope, and for a split second I thought about running back to the main barn. But before I could move, something weird happened. It was like everything went blank for a second, like my vision flickered out. Not blacking out completely, but just a quick flash of nothingness, like I'd blinked but too long. When it cleared, I was standing in the same place, my horse calm again, breathing steady. The night was silent. I just stood there trying to figure out if I'd actually passed out, or if it was just in my head. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The air smelled like damp dirt and hay, and I remember realizing how cold my hands had gotten. My horse's head was down again, like nothing had happened. The path ahead was empty. Whatever I thought I'd seen, or whoever, it wasn't there anymore. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe headlights catching from the highway behind the trees, even though I knew it didn't line up right. I kept walking, slower this time, listening hard for any kind of movement. My boots scraped the gravel, and every sound echoed back at me. I didn't let go of the lead rope once. When we reached the smaller barn, I turned him in, latched the door, and checked his water. My hands were shaking, but I went through the motions automatically, brushing some dirt off his side just to have something to do. He stood quiet, ears flicking like he was listening for something too. The walk back up the hill felt longer than before. The moon had gone behind a cloud and everything went darker. I kept glancing behind me even though I didn't want to. My chest felt tight like someone was walking right behind me, matching my pace. I didn't hear footsteps, just that faint hum in your ears you get when you're scared and trying to act like you're not. When I reached the main barn, I shut the door behind me fast. I stood there for a minute, just breathing, trying to calm down. The smell of hay, leather, and old wood was grounding. Normal. I waited until I felt steady again before grabbing my keys and heading to my truck. I didn't look back toward the path. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a few minutes with the engine running, headlights on the garage door. My mind kept replaying that flash of eyes and the moment everything went blank. I didn't tell anyone about it because I couldn't even explain what had happened. It didn't feel like a ghost story or anything supernatural. It just felt wrong, real, like someone had been there watching from the shadows, waiting for the right time to move closer. The next morning, I went back early before anyone else arrived. I wanted to prove to myself it had been nothing. The path looked normal. I walked it again, slow, scanning the trees. Halfway down, near where my horse had spooked, I saw something in the dirt. A deep boot print, not mine. It was fresh, pressed into the edge of the path, facing the barn. That's when I realized my horse hadn't been scared of shadows. Someone had been standing there in the dark, watching us. And when I blacked out for that second, maybe they'd moved. Maybe they'd stepped closer. After that night, I never stayed late at the barn again. I made sure someone else was always there to help close up. Even now, when I walk down that path in daylight, I can still picture those eyes, steady, silent, and waiting.